The pensioners say they are being made to pay for the country's overseas debts and economic problems. In a motion passed at the budget rally, they called on the government to reconsider funding cuts to all social welfare benefits. While grateful that funding to HACS, the Home and Community Care Service, has been renewed, the association says many of its members will be hit hard.
It means that those people that are living below poverty level will be forced down even further below. And to lose only $1 is a hardship to them, let alone $200 in the course of a year.
Do you think the government accused the government of breaking specific election promises in the budget?
The government promised that they would decrease the time rate between the CPI increases and the CPI increase figure announcement, and instead of doing pension increase to 1 month, instead of doing this, they've increased it by an extra 6 weeks.
In a time, though, when the whole of Australia is being called upon to tighten its belt, are you saying that pensioners should be exempt?
No, not by any means. We think that more sacrifices could be made by those people who can afford them, but the pensioners also should make sacrifices.
Meanwhile, a protest was also staged this afternoon against the closure of the Newcastle Immigration Office. The office handles 30,000 across-the-counter inquiries each year, processes re-entry visas, passport declarations and citizenship inquiries. The federal member for Newcastle, Alan Morris, says he'll fight to keep the office open.
I think I'll be prepared to fight it for a very long time if we don't win in the short term. As far as I'm concerned, it is not part of the budget. The budget required the department to reduce its expenditure. It doesn't say where. And I think in this case, this is a case where equity with restraint isn't being applied. Equity would mean that all officers of the department were reduced rather than some being cut out.
Organised as part of the Matara Festival, the children were led on a delightful adventure walk through areas of the park which had been specially decorated. Actors were positioned at various points, and in one area the keeper of the garden told the children a story and answered questions. But obviously they didn't find what they were looking for there, and as masks were handed out, they wound their way out of the garden and headed off for the next adventure in the dark cave. The walk was just one of the Matara activities organised for Civic Park over the next few days until the festival draws to a close on Sunday.
South scored first with a good try to fullback and captain Daryl Morris, and held a territorial advantage for most of the first half. And they had received all 7 penalties during that period. But for all that, the Goannas led 8-6 at the break. South, with the breeze, went to an 18-8 lead before Cessnock came back and narrowed the margin to just 4 points at one stage. A late try saw the Red and Whites of South Newcastle move 10 points in front and to victory. Cessnock officials were annoyed after the game, claiming that bad refereeing had cost them the match. There were also threats that the club would not play in the Newcastle competition next year.
The walls of the radio room of the newly established Foster Tuncurry Royal Volunteer Coastal Patrol bear the evidence of Michael's achievements. 1983 Young Australian of the Year, 1983 International Young Person of the Year. Michael became blind at 13. A year later, he was the youngest person to train with a guide dog. But it's been Michael's involvement with the Volunteer Coastal Patrol, having set up a station at Bermagui on the New South Wales south coast, which has earned him the greatest recognition. On Saturday, an opening ceremony will be held at the Foster Memorial Services Club. For Michael, it will mean the beginning of a job that involves monitoring the radio for 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, a job for which he receives no pay. In setting up and running the station, his family has paid out several thousands of dollars. What they need now is sponsorship. Blindness, Michael says, is often overcome with a few simple tricks.
In different sections of the dial we've got a blob of glue actually on top of the radio and also on the dial selector, and we line the two blobs of glue up and we know what channel we're on.
The new Coastal Patrol will coordinate with the Police Launch Foster and a volunteer rescue catamaran in the area called Double D. Michael often takes calls from as far away as Cairns and across to Western Australia. In the 3 years he manned the Bermagui operation, he led over 480 rescues. He says many of the yachties who rely on him to guide them through treacherous waters don't realise he's blind. Michael, there's a message in all of this for others with disabilities. What would you say to them?
Well, to get out and try something that they've wanted to do for their life, a hobby, job or something, and take as it comes, because when we first got involved in the radios we had quite a lot of problems when we first started doing it, how to work out the channels on the radios and that, and it's a matter of sitting down, and normally the easiest way to come over it is the simplest, and quite often it works.
And now for any boaties out there who might someday need Michael's assistance, his call sign is VH2 DXH 35, the Foster Tuncurry Coastal Patrol.
Go to their general council and I'm a bit worried that
University students passed resolutions condemning the introduction of the new tertiary fees. The first said the introduction was a treacherous act, displayed irresponsible disregard for the future of the country. The second, the implementation of a boycott against paying the fees. And the third, a request that the university support the students in their fight against the introduction of the fees. The three resolutions were passed unanimously. Then, in scenes reminiscent of the 70s, the students marched on the Vice-Chancellor's office to present him with their demands.
We're achieving an awareness within the student population of the extent of the problem. We're hoping to achieve an increase in awareness on the public's behalf of the magnitude of the problems that this is going to create. It's not going to be a short fight. It's going to take us a while, but I think we'll beat this thing.
In Wheeler Place, pensioners demonstrated against the Newcastle City Administration's alleged failure to enforce the Noise Control Act. The pensioners said they have to put up with an unacceptable amount of noise from noisy neighbours, 24-hour service stations, bus terminals and live entertainment in suburban hotels. And they say that they can't turn to the administration for help.
We had a number of complaints about different noise problems involving different circumstances, and we thought that we'd been fobbed off long enough and it was time to take a stand and try and put a bit of pressure on leading up to the council elections to get some concessions, to get some promises that we will get the Noise Regulation Act enforced in Newcastle, seeing that it is only one of two councils in New South Wales that does not enforce the Noise Pollution Act.
A spokesman for the administration says it's handling the complaints adequately and it's monitoring noise levels at the bus terminal in King Street. He says the administration is reviewing the situation.
Foster's Beer is sponsoring the Formula One Grand Prix in Adelaide this year. At our own mini Grand Prix circuit, Fun City, India, Tomago, the Lamborghini was unveiled. Foster's drinkers can win the car in an Australia-wide competition. With the low, sleek, wide looks, the car is a thoroughbred from the exclusive Italian factory. It's one of only 3 in Australia and can achieve a top speed of 320 kilometres an hour. Despite its radical design and enormous power, Lamborghinis were, however, never designed for the racetrack. The V12 engine has 4 camshafts and 4 valves a cylinder.
And as you say, it's the most elegant and beautiful machine.
Any price tag?
It's valued in excess of $250,000.
And how does this car get that incredible price tag? Every piece is handmade. The colour of this machine is also unique. Foster's Blue Thunder. The paint mix was destroyed after the car was painted.
But how did the Countach get its name? Well, when it first appeared at an Italian motor show, one car manufacturer in Italian dialect said, "This car is Countach," which is Italian for incredible and amazing.
The spectre of the IAC recommendation looms large over the textile industry. Mills like National Textiles here at Rutherford have been a major contributor to rural employment. And if tariffs on imported clothing, footwear and textile goods are drastically reduced, jobs will be lost.
Well, if the preferred option goes through, basically what it means for national textiles, and I believe textile industry and the clothing industry throughout Australia, is there will be massive job losses. The IAC talked about 20,000 people will be put out of work. The employers and the unions, as a coincidence, estimate that figure will be between 50 and 60,000 in the first instance. However, with a highly capital-intensive industry like textiles, we must sustain a certain level to be able to amortise our basic overheads, if you like. And I would say to you this, that if that option goes through, we would see a job loss from national of about 1,000 people before the end of 1994.
It's a fear shared by the unions. They claim the industry is restructuring to become more efficient and competitive. President of the Australian Textile Workers Union, John Ruffley, says more than $560 million has been spent on upgrading technology and equipment in the industry, and the tariffs need to be maintained to offset those costs.
And we have assurances from the employers that when this machinery is available, that machinery will be implemented. But we need to maintain reasonable levels of protection for the justification of that outlay in many millions of more dollars.
And so what are the advantages if the IAC recommendation is adopted? And there are job losses in the textiles industry, particularly in rural areas. Well, the IAC reckons this way, that if they can cut import tariffs from, in some cases, 130% to 50%, it'll make for a more efficient and more competitive textiles industry. And they say that if there are job losses, they'll occur over a 10-year period. The IAC says that's plenty of time for companies like National Textiles to gear their operations accordingly.
Enter the Prime Minister's Country Task Force, a group of federal politicians drawn together earlier this year, whose job it is to listen, assess and report directly to the Prime Minister on issues affecting country people. They brought to the hunter a particular knowledge of the textiles industry, having just completed a visit to the mills in central Victoria. And it seemed coincidental their first port of call in the region was the National Textiles Mill at Rutherford. At mills like this one, 60,000 people are employed throughout rural Australia.
We're certainly on this committee very concerned at the IAC report. We believe that it didn't take into account enough of the social impact. The number one priority, or the 15%, has been ruled out already by the Minister and the Government, so that any changes that do take place will take place now in view of the changes that have occurred since that report came down.
And if the talk of lowering tariffs on imported goods sounds as if it will cost jobs, then the Buy Australia campaign could also be under threat.
The real problem facing Australia is reindustrialisation. Now, you had the Prime Minister going on television some few months ago telling the world he wore Australian cotton underpants. Within a month, the Americans had finished our cotton industry by putting in a very protective regime in their own country, and the Australian Navy had bought a remotely controlled underwater vehicle from the Americans, despite the fact that the Australian one was better and cheaper. Now, no other country in the world would shoot itself in the foot like that.
The task force led for National Textiles, reaffirming its commitment to local clothing and textile manufacturers. Visits to Muswellbrook, Singleton and Maitland were next, where the group had a chance to talk with trade union leaders, councils, community groups and, of course, farmers. And while there was much debate, some heated, the tool was relatively free of incident, although at Maitland a symbolic protest cheque presentation was made by local residents. Over the government's plan to resume uranium sales to France.
We've worked out that the $66 million that Treasury is going to get from the sale of uranium to France represents about $4 from each person in Australia, and what we've done is 5 or 6 families have got together and contributed a couple of dollars each as a sort of deposit, and hopefully we've presented it to the Prime Minister's Country Task Force so that they can take it back to the Prime Minister and say that there are people in country areas concerned about the uranium issue and that they are prepared to put their money where their mouth is.
Members of the task force admitted that the 2-day visit was simply not enough time to fully assess in detail the state of the Hunters rural sector, but certainly long enough to gauge some of the problems facing our farmers and their communities.
On this visit we've been getting confirmation of the sort of things we've been seeing in their visits around Australia in the last 12 months. The downturn in commodity prices has now worked its way right through the community, and one thing that has happened that I think is good, in our first visits to regional Australia, there was a lot of anger in the country areas that they appeared to be the only ones suffering from this, and no one else seemed to care. That message is now gone, that the total Australian community is aware of the problems caused by the collapse in commodity prices.
Is there anything unique in the Hunter Valley that you haven't come across in terms of the rural sector around Australia?
No, but I think it has its same regional problems similar to the areas we visited in central Victoria, which is based on the textile industry. And there is concern here as in relation to what direction the industry should take. The IAC proposals that have been put for the government as recommendations need to be addressed and addressed fairly quickly, because industry needs to take decisions as to which direction it will go after 1989.
So what then is the overview for the Hunter Valley that you'll be reporting back to the Prime Minister?
One, I think the urgency of doing something in relation to that IAC report. Two, I think there are structural changes taking place here which are putting enormous pressures on the infrastructure of the total area. We've got, the mining resources boom that didn't occur, the debts that some of the local government areas have developed because of that. It's a general structure that has occurred in other regional areas of Australia, mainly sourced back to the fact that we were gearing ourselves to a resources boom which never occurred, and at the same time we allowed our manufacturing industries to run down with an overvalued dollar. Now, the measures that have been put in place policy-wise in the last 18 months should have been put in place 5 or 6 years ago, and we would not have today's problems.
So, as an overview, how can the Hunter Valley and its rural sector help the fight back in the rural economy?
Well, it needs to continue the development of import replacement industries, and from our discussions with the union movement, that is taking place, and there are very good signs of this occurring. And that's a major method that we have to use. We have to stop importing a lot of the equipment, a lot of the material that's coming into this country, and start making it ourselves. But we can't turn that around overnight. We hope that it'll be working much quicker and much faster, say in 12 months' time than it is today. But it's important for the Hunter Valley.
And your personal view of the rural sector in the Hunter Valley?
Well, the Hunter Valley is of some concern, because I believe that one of the major industries here is the dairy industry. It's regulated here and very regulatedly structured under a quota system, completely different to Victoria, where movement in the industry is much freer because of its much more free market approach. And I do have some concerns as to whether, as costs come upon that industry, as to whether it'll be able to adjust quickly enough to those costs under the structure that it does have.
The task force will now press on with its brief outside Australia's metropolitan areas. Barry Cunningham believes there is a continuing role for its work.
We certainly have. I think we've had some very positive results as far as the government is concerned. I think we were very instrumental in smoothing out some of the problems in the taxation area in particular, and I think we have proved that it is well worthwhile.
Can you see a role for the task force in the years to come?
Well, certainly. I think we will continue, because as reports are brought down before the Parliament, we need to have parliamentarians from all over Australia having a look at the impacts of those reports, and it makes it much more beneficial to the government and to the public and how they're implemented.
The task force will now prepare a report for the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and if it's achieved nothing else, it's at least given members of the rural community here in the Hunter Valley a chance to share their views on their future.
If anyone thinks catering isn't exactly a macho trade, take a look at this guy in action. His name is Kenji Ogawa, the chef who has turned his hand and his cutting implements to creating sculptures in ice. Kenji has been sculpting in ice for over 10 years, and today he was at the Cardiff District Workers Club to give a demonstration of the dyeing art to a group of caterers. He says many caterers miss the significance of the presentation of fine food.
The Japanese, the cooking, the part of the cooking always first looks like. So always we must have some special decorations.
The 135-kilogram block of ice took just 50 minutes to transform into this beautiful angelfish. The sculpture only lasts for 5 hours, but Kenji says he isn't disappointed to see his masterpiece melt away.
For example, the ice carving, if on the table display and with spotlight and the start melt, I mean, if set up and after 1 hour become real beautiful shape coming up. So we're happy.
That's fine, thank you. I'm going to carry on.